Midwest is known for its great fishing. Fabled trout streams hold beautiful trout. Migratory game fish such as steelhead and salmon bring tourists year after year from far and away. But another awesome and frequently neglected game fish inhabits our rivers. It fights hard and takes a wide variety of presentations. This game fish is the smallmouth bass. Along with my friend and fellow fishing guide Jon Ray, we will take you through the various ways to catch this great predator with fly fishing gear. Kevin Feenstra. I'm a fishing guide from West Michigan, and I spend the majority of my time as a professional guide on the Muskegon River system. Fishing was already in my blood even as a child. Fly fishing became a passion as a teenager. It was at that time that fly tying became a part of the fishing, and I really enjoyed being able to create a colorful pattern and then catch a fish with it.
Anything that I can basically catch on a fly I have a passion for, especially anything visual. I hope you enjoy this video.
The northern part of Michigan, a lot of those waters have very strong baitfish populations. What do you find so appealing about fishing streamer patterns for smallmouth bass?
Especially with a floating line with a little bit longer leader, it's right back to the visual aspect. Taking, hunks of very light material, draping even more hunks of flash over the top, and giving yourself a visual bright fly, throwing it to the many pieces of timber and rock and ambush points throughout the river. It's just right back to that spider and the fly mentality that I always love to watch. Put that fly in there, give it a couple twitch, and bang. And it's a way that you can cover lots of water very quickly, but it's also very visually appealing. There's also something back just to the pure love of fly fishing that I like, is that on these rivers and these bigger tailwaters, getting back to the overhead casting that we can do and challenging yourself to make that perfect cast in between 5 pieces of down timber that fell in 1843. And can you make that cast? Can you pull that fish out of there?
Flies, which sink very, very slowly, but they do sink. Typically, you'd cast that fly with a floating line, almost always with a floating line. You get it to sink just below the surface. You give it a twitch. Ideally, the way it's designed, it would sink extremely slowly so that the smallmouth, which is looking up against the surface, and a lot of times he's waiting right on the edge of a drop-off or a piece of cover, and that fly can pause right over top of whatever his structure is, whether it's that piece of cover or whether it's a piece of wood. But he's looking up and it stops right when it's above his structure, and that's when he chooses to eat the fly.
You brought that fly through that feeding zone and you stopped it. It's one of the things that I think separates maybe streamer fishing for trout than it does smallmouth. On a trout situation, and it's not always true, there's no rules here, but don't stop
for example, a lot of the trout flies that we tie, they're designed to have action in them, but they're designed to have action through the whole retrieve. Whereas a lot of the smallmouth flies that we tie, we're tying to have a lot of action, but a very specific point in the retrieve, especially if we give it that pause. And when we stop the fly, we don't want the fly to be lifeless, and so the fly, by its very design, still has life in it, whether it's flash that's almost acting like a parachute, or whether it's rubber legs that are moving, or marabou. It's all designed for that. It's not designed for when the fly is moving, it's designed for when the fly is paused. The materials do their thing, and hopefully the fish takes the fly. Well, one of the most basic things as a fishing guide, after you've been fishing for a lot of years and guiding for a lot of years, is that it tends to be something not even intentional, that you start to simplify your fly patterns. You learn over time that a lot of times some of the simpler flies can catch a lot more fish than the more elaborate published flies, and so your box becomes full of these 2 or 3 material flies that are really simple to tie. They don't take much time to tie, and that's true of a lot, if not most, of the fishing guides that I know. Holographic flashabou. I'm going to take quite a bit of this, and I'm going to tie it in just as long as the previous flash, and I'm going to tie it in above the hook, and then I'm going to slide the materials underneath and fold it, and I'm going to bind it down again. And this is what we have so far. And I'm going to give it a nice snip. Okay, so far so good. The next material we're going to take is this yellow bucktail. And I'm going to take some yellow bucktail, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie 2 clumps, one above the hook, which is what I'm tying in right now, And I'm going to snip it off at an angle. And then I'm going to take a second bunch of that yellow bucktail and I'm going to go underneath the hook. The same length as the previous clump. Again, I'm
popper fishing. You know, we've talked about it and we've reiterated how exciting it is, the visual aspect of smallmouth, and poppers have all that encompassed into one. Are there certain conditions, though, that you would fish a popper?
Poppers are kind of the pinnacle of smallmouth bass fishing. I mean, everybody loves to fish a popper. The conditions for popper fishing, if you had to typify, a bright sunny day, it would be morning, but especially in the evening. The low light periods definitely are better. I don't think in our neighborhood, smallmouth aren't a night feeding fish. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about low light. You know, the hour or two before dusk and the hour or two after dawn. Obviously, a cloudy day presents the same low light conditions, so a cloudy day you might be able to pull off more of a full day bite with that. If you see fish that are busting bait fish along the surface, that would be a natural occurrence that would also lean you towards using a surface pattern.
When you're picking a popper out of your box and you're kind of tying it onto your leader, is there like a food source that you think you're imitating with that?
You know, a lot of times in general with poppers, it's not necessarily a food source. Poppers do imitate a wide variety of things. You and I both seen fish eat a lot of different things off the surface, and we also use flies that imitate a lot of things. The most common thing that you see is a frog imitation, probably not the biggest part of a bass.